Díobh a chairde bhail is gáil agus fearam fíorchaoin fáilte roimh chuile chuig chláiste na tríóide anseo nach chuí agus chuig an lárinad aisteachán an seo. I want to welcome everybody to the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation. And I'm particularly delighted that today my guest is Mícheál Ó. Mícheál is a poet, a non-fiction writer, and more particularly for the purposes of our conversation today, he is a very distinguished translator of literature from Irish to English. Among Mícheál's collections of poetry are Leabhar Luach an Tneachta, Leabhar nAistear, and now nAistear Ró. So all of these published by Christian. Mícheál has got a particular interest in minority groups, and in particular in the Irish travellers community, and we'll be talking about this in our conversation. He is the author of, among many works, Canting with Cawley, a glossary of travellers' cant, Gowan, Parley with Me, a compendium of fairground speech, post-colonial artist Johnny Doran and the Irish traveller tradition, and insubordinate Irish travellers in the text. He is also the author of Seán Ó Ríordáin, Life and Work, which is published by Mercier in 2018. I did wonder how somebody born in Galway was allowed by Cork people to write a book about one of their own, but apparently Mícheál has such a strong standing that he was able to get away with it. And of course, Mícheál is also the translator of Mabhalach Hain, Seosamh Mac Griannna's 1965 novel, which was translated into English as This Road of Mine, and it was published by Lilliput. He's also more recently again translated Dónall Mac Amhlaigh's very fine work hAodha, which first came out in Irish in 1986 and which has been published in English as Exiles. You will have seen there at the beginning, I was doing my introduction, an arrow pointing to the chat button. So if you want to ask a question to Mícheál at any point, please enter your question in the chat button, and then I can read it then to Mícheál afterwards. So Mícheál, fáilte Rot, chuig on
Michael.
On lárinad seo, where we're absolutely delighted to have you, and thank you for making yourself available for our conversation. And Mícheál, I just wanted to begin really with a question about the Mac Griannna translation, because this is considered to be one of the great classics of modern Irish literature. But it took an awfully long time for this book to be translated into English. Why do you think, Mícheál, it took such a long time? And what have you motivated you to embark on translating one of these kind of key works from Irish?
Yeah, you're right, Michael. It did take an awful long time. I think part of it was just the maybe tortured relationship that Mac Griannna had with An Goom, because he'd worked for them as a translator, and he actually translated a vast amount of material within a couple of years, from Russian, from French, maybe via English sometimes, although he was very well read and very cultured himself. Yeah, I think there were issues around, say, he had submitted the book, and then he'd submitted another book called An Drum Mór, which is about sort of nationalist rivalries up in the Donegal Gaeltacht where he was from. And I think there were questions around, as there were with a lot of books at that time, I suppose, because Ireland is so small. Were there people identifiable in the book, you know, that possibly something was being alleged in relation to them, you know? God knows, you know. That book is about a big drum and drum mór, which is brought out every year as a kind of a symbol, a national symbol. But it's in the book that there's kind of an argument over or it's I suppose it's a right passage for the person who plays the drum every year, a young man from the local community. But it's also what was kind of the status of the drum was fought over between different nationalist groupings, I suppose, you know. Yeah, and the other thing was just getting paid by them as well, you know. I suppose there's some the last book which he wrote, which he was working on, which he never finished, unfortunately, because he you know, he suffered a real sort of major psychiatric breakdown really after Mabaloch Féin, and there are a lot of hints of it in the book, I think, you know, where he's questioning himself about whether he has it in him really to write this book that he has in mind, kind of thing. And in a sense, yeah, so that's really what's behind that is, but I think as well maybe possibly some of these writers like Ó Ríordáin as well, I think, you know, they had such a mythical status kind of thing. It was like people were nearly afraid to go near them, you know what I mean, you know, and afraid of I had a little bit of that, I suppose, when I was translating that, you know, that you wanted it to be as perfect as possible, you know, you didn't want to make any major errors anyway, you know. But I always liked the book as well, to be honest with you, and I think anyone who reads it in either the Irish or the English, and now it's been translated at the moment into Welsh and into Norwegian, hopefully, and a few other languages, I think they, you know, they enjoy it. It's kind of a wistful tone through the thing. It's a dark humor, you know. He's very straight, you know. He says from the first line of the book, he says, you know, being an Iarna Sharav, or Jerdina Gumina Iarna Sharav, you know, the truth is bitter, and this is why, and it's Garav, it's rough, and this is why people avoid it, you know. And he's saying, really, he's looking for the walk through Wales is kind of a physical manifestation of his inner world, where he's trying to find the poetry in himself again, you know. And he also says at the start, you know, he was worn out from translating, to be honest. And he felt that he had to leave it, you know, because his creative spark would be completely gone, you know, if he did any more, you know. So I think he actually translated, you know, 500,000 pages or something like that.
But he famously said that, wasn't it, that Biographical first and Biographical was as easy as tying my shoelaces. But
yeah.
I mean,
some of that was boasting, of course, as well. That's a very interesting part of the book is, even though it's kind of, I see traces of Eastern European literature in it, you know, and maybe Jewish tradition as well. The Holy Fool who's kind of walking through from one town to the next, meeting people, kind of a beggar or the artist in disguise kind of thing. But there's also the other strand there then as well, which he got from his upbringing, which was this idea of the hero, you know, and the heroic literature he would have heard. His parents and grandparents were, you know, I think they were non-literate, but they were well known as storytellers in that, in the Donegal Gaeltacht he came from, in Rana First, and as well as that, they're the type of stories they would have scaled on Leabhar, you know, stories about the hero getting the better of other people, etc. So there's a lot of boasting at the start, you know, like kind of I'm the man, I'm the best poet in Ireland, you know, and I'm going to show everybody, but I'm not recognized, you know, no one appreciates me, kind of thing. And, yeah, there's some of it would nearly remind you that the only vestiges really we have of that anymore, I think, are in, funnily enough, in boxing, I think, you know, where nowadays people call out other people and go, I'm the man, you know what I mean? You know, can you do better than I can? Do you know what I mean? You know, and funnily enough, amongst the travelers, you know, they still have that as well, you know.
So, I just think, Mícheál, in terms of, you know, when you were translating the book, did you, because, you know, there is a very kind of singular vision in McGriann's book, you know, very specific kind of voice and way of looking at things and thinking about things. And I mean, did you feel that as a translator you were sort of entering into the world of McGrianna, into his kind of psyche? That did you feel?
Yeah, up to a point. I mean, he could be quite dark at times, you know, but then he'd allay it with a bit of humor or a funny story, you know, and you're seeing his thoughts, you know, as he's walking through this landscape, you know, and sleeping outdoors and testing his body physically, but he's really testing his mind, I suppose, and his imagination. But yeah, I suppose really, I don't know, just the translations that I've read from other languages, I think if you can get an echo of the voice of the person or the music of them or the poetry that's in them, I think that's the sign of a good translation, you know. And I liked his kind of very direct northern style of this is how it is, you know. I'm not going to tell you a lie, you know. The truth is tough, you know, but and it's a very different style, to be honest, of writing from maybe a lot of the other published writers who wrote kind of autobiographical type material in Irish, you know. A lot of the Munster writers, like the Munster style is much more flowery and more kind of nearly showing off in terms of language, you know, and dexterity of language and sort of a richness of you know, whereas his poetry and his kind of his dialogue is just very lum, as they say in Irish. It's bare, it's direct, and it reminds you of maybe the way people talk in the north of England, you know, where I lived myself for a good few years, you know. And you ask a straight question and you get a straight answer, you know. But I mean, he could also launch into like the most beautiful poetry as well when he wanted to, you know. So I actually think in a way maybe he was cursed by having possibly too much talent. You know what I mean? Like he was that rare bird, maybe that his imagination was too full and too that he was overwhelmed, really, you know.
What did you feel kind of a sense, you know, when you were translating Mavalachain into this road of mine in English, a sense, for example, dialectically, did you want to you know, did you feel any pressure to kind of give a sort of a Donegal flavour to the English in the text? No,
not really. To be honest, I was surprised that it hadn't been translated, you know, years ago. So I just contacted Goom and said, you know, would you be interested in it? You know, it was just a hobby, really, you know, and because I'd always liked the book since I was younger. I suppose I really sort of got interested in reading in Irish when I was living abroad, you know, when I was living in England, and kind of there were just so many different languages around me, you know, Urdu and Gujarati and Jamaican English, etc. And I just thought, you know, it's crazy really that the educational system I'd been through anyway. I'd never been through any. I never lived in the Gaels. I didn't go to any Gaels school. They weren't around when I was there. I just thought it was madness, really, that we'd spent 20 years at school, and yet from the brightest lads to anybody, you know, most of us could barely write a sentence in Irish, you know, once we left school, and we couldn't, we certainly couldn't read anything, do you know what I mean, in Irish, you know. And so I just thought, yeah, this is a book that was written for, it's a universal book, you know. It wasn't written for 40 or 50 academics who could read it back when he wrote it, you know, or when it was published. But, and the other thing as well is, I suppose, everything really is a translation in a sense. I suppose what I mean by that is that, like, it doesn't matter. It's a universal. I suppose translation is a universal language, really, because we're reading about someone's experiences and they're translated into words. So there's already a translation happening, and I suppose we're seeing the world through someone else's eyes, you know, and sort of, you know, he says at the start, kind of the boasting thing, you know, I'm not interested in other people, you know, I'm a loner, I'm the kind of the lonely sort of romantic poet. There's a bit of the romanticism there, but actually he's very interested in people, because anyone he meets along the way, he sort of describes maybe what he thinks they're thinking and what they'd really do if such a thing, you know, happened, you know, if they had a chance to rob a shop or something like that, or, you know, and it's very funny as well. I mean, it's that's what saves it from being, you know, too depressing, you know, is that he has this kind of dark, sardonic humor all the time running through it, and I enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot, and I think as well the Donegal style, that kind of direct style, is closer to the West of Ireland style as well, you know. So where I'm from originally, you know. So yeah, and the other thing as well was he was an interesting person in the sense that I think a translator should know as much as they can about the person and about their life, the person that they're translating, you know. That'd be the only prerequisite really I'd have for, so I there wasn't a whole lot there about him. Like, there's a very interesting book by Paul O'Murray, the former editor of the Irish Times, or sorry, Irish language editor in the Irish Times. But, you know, and I thought it was just really curious how it could only happen in Ireland, maybe, you know, that somebody could suffer a severe nervous breakdown and then spend more than half their life, the rest of their life, in and out of a psychiatric unit, and no one really even knew whether he was there or not, or, you know, kind of, and I just thought that was tragic. I mean, you know, because such a talented guy, like, you know, and no one even knew about him, you know. No one, unless the small handful of people who would have read Irish, you know, or can read Irish now as well. So
I mean, it's interesting how he became sort of a very emblematic figure for a younger generation, like Seamus McConney and Cófach Malunda of Bui, and then in the kind of late 80s when he starts writing his trilogy, where, you know, there's references to Magriannà a lot that come up in the
he was one of the few people, I think, who actually visited him, maybe in Letterkenny Hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. No, talking about the kind of the relationship, you know, between translation and life and biographies, and I was just wondering, in terms of your translation of Dónall Mac Amhlaigh and hAodha, you've mentioned your experience of living in England, and north of England. I mean, was it your own experience of that kind of exile for a period that sort of drew you to Mac Amhlaigh's book, to translate it?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a very different book from Mac Griannna. It's not really philosophical in the sense that Mac Griannna's book is, or kind of. Now there is quite a lot of sadness in it as well. Yeah, I felt in that case, I was just interested in him as a writer because he'd lived in England all his life, and he was kind of the voice of the Irish in England I used to write a huge amount for the newspapers here, etc., Ireland's Own, Irish Times, Irish Press, etc. He was a fascinating person because he had basically produced a vast amount of short stories, novels, etc., and a huge amount of journalism, massive amount. And he'd done all that while he was working as a labourer every day, and just in the breaks kind of thing, in the job. And signs on it, maybe he died quite young. He was only in his late 50s, and he died on his way to give a talk, actually, in Northampton. I suppose my wife's family, they didn't grow up there, but they're originally of Connemara background, so and he used to work with all the Connemara people, because he liked their Irish. So they would have all known him quite well, and he was just a very humble person as well. And from what I've heard of him, I never met him now, but I know people who have, and I just liked that about him. And as well as that, I just thought, I think the last census there was a 2011, or was it later than that, an updated version. In the census in England, there were 1 million people in England who had been born in Ireland, still living, and I just thought, that's a huge amount of people. They all left around the same time as when he was describing what he was describing in that book. And I just thought their experiences haven't really, there are very few books in Irish English or English written at that period about those people, or by those people. And I suppose, to be honest, a lot of them, they were so young when they left. A lot of them were, barely out of national school, had to leave, get work for various family reasons, etc. An awful lot of them were from the west of Ireland, and a lot of the men worked in construction. A lot of the women worked as nurses, as nannies, as nurse assistants, etc., etc. It's a generalization, but probably the women got on better than the men, socially and sort of in terms of class and all that. I just thought that there's nothing like his books. There really isn't, describing kind of their hopes and dreams of those people, and also just the business of how does an immigrant kind of adapt to a new society. And I suppose it's very timely as well, because that's just a fluke, really, to be honest. Because I only did it as a hobby a good few years ago. I started translating it, and he's nice, nice kind of Connemara Irish. It's not difficult to translate. It's just timely when you see the Brexit, and that the relationship is changing between both our countries, and sort of you have second, third generation people born in England now looking for their birth certs back here, or the birth certs of people they're connected to, so that they can be in Britain and in Europe, etc. And
Mícheál, when you were sort of, working on, so you translate hAodha as into English as Exiles, but one of his previous books, Steele and Jodie, Valentine Ironmonger had translated as Navi's Diary, I think, in English. Did you look at Ironmonger's translation of Steele and Jodie?
I might have read it years ago, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't really look at it for this. There are 3 main characters in the book, and in a previous generation, maybe I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I could have related to, I would have heard stories similar to what they experienced. One is a woman who's kind of been going out with a lad for a long time, but he won't take the plunge and marry her, and he keeps using his mum as an excuse, kind of thing, that she's allegedly sick, sort of thing. So, but everybody in the community expects them to kind of get married, and she eventually kind of gets sick of waiting for him to do something about it, and so she answers an ad and heads off. And actually, it's very interesting because the other two characters then are, another guy he's Trevor Barkley, and he's a kind of a bit of a wild man. He's a boxer, and he works in the building sites during the day, and he's kind of the fella who's away from home, away from his wife and children, you know, and has spent more time over there, to be honest, than at home, and doesn't come home very often at all. He actually doesn't want his wife and children to join him over there because he is a wild, partying, drinking, womanizing the odd time lifestyle, and but his wife is insisting that she wants to come over, kind of thing. And there's a lot of good descriptions of the lodging houses then where he's with the other lads kind of in the lodging house. And then the last person then is it's an imagined character, obviously, not Neil, where he's the one person who stayed at home. So he's describing what it's like back home where there's no work. Late 40s, early 50s, you know, the economy is very depressed. Most of they're just hanging around, you know, nothing to do kind of thing. So, and sorry, I probably wandered off your question there. Oh, Michael.
No. It's just I mean, the influence of the art, but obviously, you know, you were just one before we kind of go on maybe to talk a little bit about your interest in traveller language and culture, but it strikes me that there's another novel of Macaulay's Schnitzer O'Shea, which is just, you know, crying out to be translated. You know, a wonderful piece of writing that I think is very much of a particular kind of Bruno Nulon, kind of Miles Legoplin, Line-esque. I mean, and given that, you know, you've had such critical success with this, the translation of Exiles, would you be tempted to try your hand at Schnitzer O'Shea's?
Yeah, the only thing, I think Schnitzer O'Shea, now it might have been published by a very small publisher, but I have a funny feeling that there's some version of it out there, you know, possibly even the Northampton Connolly Association that he helped found Macaulay, and he's a strong socialist and Republican socialist, I suppose. I'm not sure.
Okay, there's a message came up here in the chat from Anton Machaudon saying that Macaulay apparently did his own translation of Schnitzer O'Shea. So,
oh, did he?
That might be.
Apologies, there's someone shouting at the door here. Just one second.
Okay. So thank you for that piece of information, Anton, because it's
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Oh no, they were banging there for a while, and I thought they'll go away now, and then hammering on the door. Sorry, yeah.
No, and just to, as they say, breaking news. Anton Machaudon said that it was published by Brandon Press in 1985.
Oh, okay.
There we are. That particular one has been covered. So what I want to ask you about now, Mícheál, was that, you know, you've done a lot of work over the years on traveller language and culture, and what's sort of interesting is that, you know, we see you know, a greater attention now to the languages of Ireland, I mean, English, Irish, Irish Sign Language. Do you think that kind of proper recognition for you know, the Irish travellers as a language community is kind of long overdue? Do you think has that been very much kind of neglected, and that's part of the more general social discrimination?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, they are at the moment, I think, trying to working with travellers to have a, you know, some kind of segment within the curriculum in schools, in secondary schools, I think about traveller culture and about traveller language, etc., or languages. And but like, not to be putting a downer on it, but I wonder, is it too late? You know what I mean? You know, for certain things, you know. So I suppose intercultural passing of information or passing of culture between generations until recently, with better health and better kind of access to schools, to hospitals, to everything like that. The generations were very short, you know, so you didn't see many people, you know, when I was a kid, you didn't see many people above 50, to be honest, or 45. So how well some things have been passed on, you know,
for example,
yeah,
Mícheál, somebody who's you know worked with the community over the years. I mean, were there difficulties with respect to access to the language, or you know, I mean, was the sense with the language maybe was a kind of protective barrier against kind of intrusion from the outside that wasn't?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the people that I worked with, they're all dead now, may they rest in peace. You know, Pecker John, he came from a kind of a circus show people background, so he spoke Parlare, which is kind of an Italianate language, you know, with other elements in it. Irish language, Old English words, cant word or cant or gammon, as spoken by the rest, you know, the maybe 85% of the traveller community. You know, they were keen, to be honest with you, to and so was Willie Cawley, who died quite young, like he was only in his early 50s, I think, died about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. They were quite keen to record what they could. Do you know what I mean? You know, as in write it down. You know, and the other thing as well is, you know, there was a certain amount of exoticism going on as well. You know, where people were saying, you know, people who had no interest in the language really were protecting it from, you know, other from you know, other travelers are from non-travelers, you know, and like in every public library in the country and in Britain as well, there was a book there, The Secret Languages of Ireland, which was written by McAllister in late 1800s, based on a lot of travelers he'd spoken to in Liverpool, you know, and so it no, I mean, and the other thing as well is, yeah, that they were, yeah, you might have had the odd person maybe who would have been, you know, oh no, it's secret and all the rest of it. But there was a program done, a very good program, documentary done, just called Conch or Cant on TG Cahir about 10-15 years ago, and you know, the travellers, all the traveller correspondents, you know, spoke very openly about it, about the Cant, and said, listen, this is the situation, you know, that maybe it's not used as much at all anymore, you know, by a lot of families, you know. And said straight out, you know, like we should be doing something about this. Do you know what I mean? You know, and I think at the moment there are a few traveller development groups in the country now who are trying to, you know, the most important thing to me about that was that it came from the travellers themselves. Do you know what I mean? You know, like you didn't want to be somebody kind of coming in from the outside, sort of going, you know, tell me the word for blah blah blah. You know, yeah. Like Willie Cawley even illustrated his vocabulary with his own pictures. You know, because he was a very good painter and sketch artist. So.
And what about
as well, actually, which has opened things up as well, to be honest with you, is that a lot of travellers, I suppose, are more settled now in many ways, as in like that's the state as well. You know, they're not allowed to move around in Ireland much compared to other countries, but they're also, you know, a lot of them send their children to the Gael schools now, Gael school movement, and they can see the influences then and sort of see, you know, a significant portion of the vocabulary is you know, older forms of Irish or Irish that's disguised possibly by, you know, almost certainly some of the vocabulary by literary people, you know, maybe the poets, the Philly Tatchell at one time. So, you know, they can see that words like great and arrogant and, you know, lacking, Colleen, you know, etc. So there's probably more of awareness than maybe amongst younger people, maybe that you know, of the value of the culture, etc. You know, whereas maybe previously, sometimes depends on the person and depends on the family, but like sometimes in the past, maybe you would have had you know, similar attitudes possibly as were in my opinion anyway, as happened with the Irish language, you know, that maybe it was associated with another time and with maybe poverty and, you know.
And would you see
not cool anyway, you know?
Yeah. I mean, would you see, you know, recently this collection by Eoin de Wardle, Why the Moon Travels, you know, which is, you know, traveler tales have been kind of retold, and, you know, he's kind of a canter gammon glossary at the end of the book. I mean, and a lot of the kind of the intros to the stories are very much, I think, you know, he talks about the experience of settled travelers, and but I mean, would you see that as the beginning maybe of that movement of a greater?
Yeah. Hopefully, like Eoin has got a lot of, you know, the book has done really well, and he's you know, made a really good job of you know, nice stories that were told by his family, you know, like hopefully it is, yeah, certainly. I suppose it depends. I'm not a linguist, but you know the way some linguists anyway are always judging a language and its survival or decline by how much it's spoken and how much it's maybe rightly so, how much it's spoken and how much it's how much of a language, or sorry, how much of a lexicon is there. Do you know what I mean? You know, that's left. You know, so and the other thing as well is his book kind of places you know, well, it's kind of on a par with maybe other groups who've you know, maybe immigrants who've come here in recent times. You know, there's lots of different Roma groups here, small groups of them, and you know, a lot of those groups are going through similar type, depending on what country they're in. You know, whether it's France, England, wherever. How is their lexicon used then? You know. Or how much Roman or Romany do they use? You know, I suppose no more than with the Irish language, to be honest. A lot depends on the background of the people who are speaking it, and unfortunately, a lot depends on economics, really. You know, and like without question, like in Connemara, say, a huge kind of thing that has killed Irish is the fact that a lot of the people who speak it don't live in Connemara. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no job, you know, they can't. There's been an emigration every generation, you know. So that's going to kill a community language pretty quickly, you know, if there's no one around. So and obviously there's all the other factors as well of the Anglophone world pushing in all the time on minorities.
One of the things that, you know, because if I look at a kind of a thread through your work and preoccupations, Mícheál, is, you know, from the translation work to the work with the Irish travelers, is your concern with, or your interest in groups that find themselves on the edges, the periphery, whether it be individuals, groups, collectives, languages, and to what extent does that tie in with your work as a poet, as a writer? You know, the collection of poetry with Cuishcéim. I mean, you know, is there a sense in which, in your poetic language, you're trying to articulate maybe what it's like to be someone that, you know, isn't in a conventional place, or, you know, is looking at things from an angle. So you can translate from an angle, and you can write from an angle, and you can live at an angle to mainstream society.
Yeah, I don't think I as regards to poetry, I don't think, to be honest, I consciously sort of planned that or looked at it that way. It was just more that I was working in England for a good few years, and I met all these, you know, older people who'd left Ireland, and they had a kind of a tortured relationship with Ireland, I suppose, a lot of them, you know. Some people loved it, but had a romantic view and would never come back anyway. And we're always talking about it. And some people, you know, for different reasons, there would have been some people who hated Ireland as well and couldn't wait to get out of here and never wanted to come back, you know. And kind of what I was trying to explore in that, and also just, yeah, just their experiences, you know, to kind of give voice to that sort of, because actually in a funny kind of way, a lot of the time abroad, I thought, and it's the same goes for the travelers as well, to be honest, I think culture actually survives amongst people who are on the, you know, on the margins of the main of home, if you want to put it like that. You know, that, like, say in the music in England, like in traditional music, you had, if you go into a session there in Liverpool or Manchester or Luton or whatever, you'd have people playing music that you just wouldn't hear in a lot of the time in pubs here, you know, tunes from the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. And funnily enough, a lot of the time we have to go to those people, you know, to get our culture back. You know, if you look at fiddle music, Michael Coleman, you know, spent most of his life in England, I think, and America. Joe Cooney, you know, the accordion player from Loughrea, spent, you know, most of his life in America. Okay, you have Riverdance. That's a whole other issue. But yeah, but a lot of the dancers who were in Riverdance were actually second generation Irish or whatever, you know, and had probably grown up with more Irishness than, if you want to put it like that, than people over here, you know. Like, in fact, sometimes people over there used to say we're the true Irish, you know what I mean, you know, because they'd say when we go home, say, this is going back 15, 20 years ago now, they'd say when we do go home, this be younger people, they'd say they've no interest in that, you know what I mean, you know, like, they've no interest in the Irish dance, or they've no interest in you know, I can play loads of tunes and whatever, you know, and they kind of laugh at us, and they kind of think we're, you know, we could be a bit derogatory about them, you know, that they're plastic paddies and all that kind of stuff, you know. And I'm sure they resented that a bit, but in another way, it kind of helped them to hang on to things. I think that maybe, like, I suppose Ireland, to me, in my eyes anyway, I think Ireland has changed more in 10 years than an awful lot of other European countries changed in 40, you know. And just the speed of social change here is just, it's phenomenal, like, you know. So that you have people, I'm 51 now, but I remember, say, travelers when they were living in tents, etc. And you know, now people are living in apartments. You know what I mean? You know, the change is just so swift. Like, I think it was John McGahern, was it, who said that we had no 20th century in Ireland at all, that we just went straight from the 19th into the 21st. So
yeah, there's kind of this springing forward. Before I kind of invite people to you know, send us in questions, Mícheál, I just wanted to sort of, a final question really is that, so, you know, you've translated hAodha, you've translated Mabhálach, you know, we've got this kind of movement that's on now, translating Irish fiction, the two Crain Kidda translations. I mean, do you think that one of the effects of these translations will be to draw people to kind of read the texts in Irish, or is it more likely to maybe accelerate the movement of just simply translating more text into English because there's such a huge body of work there, like Alan Titley's that study on Mícheál Ó, you know, I mean, there are hundreds of titles that are untranslated. So,
yeah.
how do you feel it'll go if you had a crystal ball?
Yeah. I think it'll definitely hopefully give a boost to, you know, literature in the Irish language, and kind of hopefully sort of put it up there with, you know, to a certain extent with, you know, with other European languages, etc., where it should have been all the time anyway. But I'm not sure the publishing scene is so that has changed very quickly as well, and you know, it's very commercial, etc. And you know, it wasn't easy to get those 2 books translated, you know, or sorry, it wasn't easy to get them published, you know, in Ireland at all. And it's ironic actually that it's in England, you know, sorry, well, in Wales, say the Exiles book was published, you know, and
well, why do you think
factors there?
I was going to ask you. I mean, obviously, you know, as they say, I don't want you to name names, but well, you know, where did the reluctance come from, do you think?
I think it's just the market, you know, it's just driven by money, and like a lot of things, and you know, Literature Ireland have been fantastic, you know, and really supportive, but like yeah, you could think of books in the morning, say, and you mentioned Snitcher O'Shea there now, which is a very funny book, and I'm not sure that any Irish publisher would take them, a lot of them, you know what I mean, you know, unfortunately, in English, you know. Funnily enough, I think there might be a few books in the future that maybe someone will translate into English, and then they'll be but not publish, and then they'll be translated into another language, and then someone will say, oh, you know, we should have that in English, published in Ireland, you know. Like fair play to Lilliput, you know, they were, you know, they were very interested in, they could see the cultural relevance, and just, you know, that Mac Griannna was up there kind of with Orwell and other writers that he liked himself, you know, and he was, you know, a modernist, etc. Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, Michael. Yeah, because I mean, the Craine Aquila and a good few of the other books, some of them have been published in America, I think, haven't they? I think Yale University Press, kind of academia. I suppose academia has a big effect on that as well, you know, which is good about our session today. That kind of dictates what's popular as well, I think, and who are popular, you know, and
I mean, what's interesting, you know, in terms of the, you know, a book like hAodha, it seems to me that the questions that are raised in it, or that, you know, kind of explored, I mean, obviously there's the Brexit dimension, but I think more broadly there's the, you know, the migrant, the refugee issue in Europe, you know, and you know, many parts of the world, and this is an issue, of course, that's simply not going to go away. And so getting that perspective of what it's like to be a kind of a gastarbeiter, a kind of migrant worker in a different culture, and how, you know, people work their way through the kind of the psychological and the social and the economic dilemmas that come. So it's you know, these books have such they have a very broad contribution to make to public understanding. It's not just, you know, our own particular space here or in Britain, but further.
Yeah, like the main female character, Nano, in the woman who kind of decides, you know, her life is kind of going stale or whatever over here, and she wants to strike out and have a new life. Like, she's the bravest character in the book, you know, because she now we see all our fears and our internal fears and kind of about stepping outside her community. But at the end of the book, and it's interesting that Macaulay ended it like that. She's you know, she's going out with a lad from Lithuania, you know, who's also an immigrant, you know. She's kind of broken away from the Irish community, you know, the bonds that sort of, she's had the guts to, you know, whereas some of the men haven't. So, yeah, that's no, you're absolutely right. Like you could see, well, hopefully you could see the book's been of a lot of interest maybe in Poland and you know, Germany and places like that, Russia, Latvia. Yeah, it's just as regards say trying to get them published, it's just the scene has changed so quickly over here, you know, that it's a numbers game, and we won't name any names, but like say it was extremely difficult to even get a review of some of them. Do you know what I mean? You know, in our leading newspapers here, you know, because both of them were published around last October, say, in this side of the world anyway. And you know, basically I was told kind of thing, you know, you're going to have to wait until the big sellers are you know, until after Christmas kind of thing, you know. Yeah. And then I had to write, you know, I wrote the articles myself, you know, once or twice. Do you know what I mean? No, so that there's, yeah, I think there's a problem there, definitely. You know, like
yeah, I think, well, that's, you know, I think more
that's for another day.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of so again, I just my colleague James Hadley will send a message out to everyone. If you got a question, any aspect of what Mícheál has been talking about, just send us the chat through the chat function, and we'll be able to. Mícheál would be very happy to respond. I mean, I see a comment here from Anthony Macaron. So I think this is in relation to the Mac Griannna and Mavalach Hain. He describes what he thinks they're thinking. So I suppose this the relationship between the narrator and other people, but he doesn't actually speak to any of them a lot of the time. So it's so I suppose Anthony's point is probably that it's a kind of it's this internal dialogue with others.
It's like Martin O'Kine, everything is inside in the head, you know. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I suppose there was an academic in UCD, Caoimhín Mac Amhlaigh, a number of years ago wrote an interesting essay where he talked about a lot of the kind of the main protagonists or narrators in Irish books were very much. You know, they're kind of solipsistic characters. They kind of talk to themselves, or you know, it was very much internal. So there's a question here from Lisa Foran. So thank you for this wonderful conversation, which has left me a list of new books to order. Two questions, if there's time. Do you think that these communities in the margins become trapped in a stagnant version of their identity, but as well as repositories of cultural memories, they can become a bit isolated and maybe even defensive? So maybe just take that one first, Mícheál. So do you think, is there a tendency to...
Yeah, definitely, I'd say, yeah. I mean, ironically, by forcing travelers to settle in Ireland, you know, like they never built any transient sites like they have in France or in for different traveling groups, you know. I'm not saying that they didn't have discrimination and problems in other places, in other countries, but basically the policy here has been, you know, officially to the EU, it's, you know, we're very respectful of minorities, cultures, etc., but on the ground then it's not really translated into any sort of meaningful, younger travelers coming up, their choice is either to stay on an overcrowded site, you know, sometimes dangerous, you know, or move into housing, you know, local authority housing maybe a lot of the time. You know, ironically, actually, I think there was a campaign there when times were better, sort of the end of the 80s, early 90s, where Citizen Traveller, and there was a survey done at the time. And I think they found like very shocking kind of figures of, 85% of settled people in a lot of different areas had never spoken to a traveller. Do you know what I mean? And, I believe that there was a lot more interaction between settled and traveller, going back years ago. Like, it's quite obvious. Travellers will tell you that themselves. Well, like a lot of them they might have one grandparent who was a settled person, or etc. So, and of course, there's been tensions, obviously, over land use and all the rest of it over the last sort of 40 years. Land has become so valuable, and etc. But yeah, it's ironic that you kind of force the people to become physically closer to us and live on the outskirts of cities, etc. And yet you actually isolate them more. You know what I mean? A lot of the time, or they isolate themselves more as well. It's not it's a one-way street, like so. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, Mícheál, just because we're running a bit out of time here, but I just want to take one last question. It's from Kathleen Fingleton, and she says, isn't there fear on the part of certain Irish language authors that publishing an English translation will dispense Irish readers when they need to read the original? I mean, the fear has been around for a long time. I mean,
that's true. Yeah, that's been there since the foundation of the state, and that's the reason. Really, that's the raison d'être, that there were so few translations of the classics, etc. Before this, because there is no funding. There is no you have to go outside Ireland a lot of the time to get published, etc. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, but the other side of it then is, it's not good either that Martin O'Kine and Mac Griannna and whatever have to wait a century before, the rest of the world can hear about them, and so it's a two-edged sword. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you're not guaranteed either that they'll be able to. Martin O'Kine, say, his Irish, you'd need a dictionary, to be honest, to reading it, like, beside you. So it wouldn't be an easy read either, always. So there's that going on as well. And the other thing as well is just how many people are genuinely nowadays able to read the original Irish,
Yeah, that's we
pretend there are thousands of them.
Absolutely, and well, anyway, I think what it does signal, though, is that, I mean, the very great service that you've done, Mícheál, to readers, and giving access and creating some readers the desire to access the text in Irish, and for others where your English translation can act as a kind of a relay for translations into other languages, and then make these works part of world literature, which I think is very
hopefully.
I think we'd like to just on behalf of the centre, and I think everybody who's participated this lunchtime, to thank you so much for speaking so eloquently and movingly about the craft, not just of translation, but of thinking about community, minority language. Gur míle maigad ó críofa dat sprág go lugus ítach spéisiú.
Anna Slán
So for those of you who have enjoyed our conversation, if you go to the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation website, you'll find plenty of information about our upcoming events. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. If you really enjoyed the conversation and would like to contribute to the activities of our centre, we have friends of the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation, and you find information on our friendship scheme on the link there on the screen. So this is basically allowing you access to particular events and activities of the centre, and allowing us, cooperating with us to build on our activities and profile. So thank you once again for listening in this lunchtime, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Go to Mícheál Ó.